Welcome to Who Are You to Say? Children's Literature and the Censorship Conversation. Thank you for joining us this morning. I'm Cynthia Weill, the Director of the Center for Children's Literature. We feel very, very honored at Bank Street to be sponsoring this important conversation. I want to thank our colleagues at Bank Street who did so much to make today possible, especially our library team, Christian Frida, Director of Library Services, and Leonard Marcus. Of course, thanks to our amazing moderators who have traveled from afar to be with us, David Shipler, Liz Levy, and Leonard, as well as the panelists and keynote speaker, Joan Burton. We're greatly appreciative of your time and contributions. A couple of housekeeping details. If you need help with anything, look for a person with a starburst on their name tag that indicates that they're a volunteer. For those of you who would like to tweet, our network is events. The password is connect@BSC. Please use hashtag censorship conversation at Bank Street LIB. And this information is on the back of your program. I should also note that there's a short bibliography of articles. There's a URL that you can follow. Many of these were written by our panelists and moderators, as well as other experts in the field, and you can take a look at those later when you want to read up. The team at the Bank Street Bookstore is selling books by all of the authors presenting today in the lobby. If you have not been to the new bookstore at 107th Street and Broadway, we highly encourage you to do so once the conference is over. It's a wonderful new space. And also, please mark your calendars for the 45th Annual Book Fest, which is on October 22nd. Pam Munoz-Ryan will be the keynote. One more important detail, there are bathrooms on every floor, including the sea level in the lobby and then every floor above us. And now it's my pleasure to begin our morning. Leonard Marcus will give us a brief introduction to the historic roots of censorship in the United States. Leonard is one of the world's leading writers about children's books and the people who create them. His award-winning books include Show Me a Story, Dear Genius, Golden Legacy, and the annotated Phantom Tollbooth. In the fall, Candlewood will publish his next interview collection, Comics Confidential, 13 graphic novelists talk story, craft, and life outside the box. And now I will hand this over to Leonard Marcus.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. Conversation, I think, is a really good word for today.
Right up.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, good. We made contact. Okay. The subset of children's books that we call children's literature first came into its own sometime during the mid-19th century, both in England and the United States. From then onward, stories about children as they are took their place beside stories about children as they ought to be. No sooner does Lewis Carroll's Alice, who first made her appearance in 1865, begin her descent down the rabbit hole, and she starts to shed her good girl manner. A few years later, when Mark Twain's Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn made their mischief on the page and spoke to the world in a rough-hewn vernacular, some high-minded adults thought it better to keep children from reading about them. Light entertainment reading for young people proliferated in the latter half of the 19th century too. Many of these stories took the form action-driven, sometimes violence-laced, dime novels sold at newsstands. Children and teens loved these colorful books, in part because they could purchase them with their own pocket money, which made them seem all the more threatening to some adults, and rightly so, in the sense that the books diminished the adults' control over the young people. A century later, Judy Blume's fame and notoriety would be built on the strength of her equally affordable paperback editions. The extreme popularity of the dime novels brought a sure and swift response from Anthony Comstock, a self-appointed morality policeman who in 1873 founded the New York Society for the Suppression of Vice to enforce his ideas and values on the public at large. That same year, Comstock persuaded Congress to bar the U.S. Post Office from delivering literature about contraception, abortion, other matters he deemed immoral. And in 1883, he published a book called Traps for the Young, in which he condemned dime novels for the damage he said they did to the moral fiber of America's youth. The public librarians who, starting around 1900, chose for the first time to specialize and work with children were equally impatient with dime novelists and with Comstock. They wanted real literature for children, not formulaic fiction or formulaic morality tales. And from then onward, the librarians fought the good fight for what they judged to be literary and artistic merit. In the 1930s and 1940s, turning their sights on 10-cent comic books, which they regarded as sub-literary and sensationalistic. To their credit, these librarians set out not to suppress books of which they disapproved, at least not generally, but rather to offer children a more worthy alternative. They even put shiny medallions on some of their favorites. Library children's reading rooms had first been introduced as a standard feature of America's public libraries in the early 1900s. And it's interesting to note that the rooms were created with two very different goals in mind: to give children their own special place, which to read the good books that the librarians had chosen for them, and to keep children at arm's length from other books that the adults did not want them exposed to. The racy French novels of Balzac, for example, as is comically highlighted in Meredith Willson's Broadway classic, The Music Man. Real censorship has more typically come from other quarters, as when, in 1954, the German-born American psychiatrist Frederick Wertham attacked action comic books in a best-selling critique called Seduction of the Innocent, which he argued on supposedly scientific grounds that comics cause juvenile delinquency. Impressed by Wertham's credentials, the U.S. Senate decided to investigate, holding hearings that resulted in the comics publishers banding together in an exercise of preemptive self-censorship to establish a creativity-deadening watchdog comics code for their industry. In this country, unlike in authoritarian regimes such as mainland China or Soviet Russia, censorship and related activities calculated to produce a chilling effect on writers and readers have not typically originated with the central government. But in the 1958 case, The Rabbit's Wedding, a daydreamy, might even say trippy, picture book fantasy by Garth Williams about a black rabbit and a white rabbit who fall in love and marry. That instance illustrates what has often happened at the state or local level. After the Montgomery Home News, publication of the Montgomery, Alabama chapter, the segregationist White Citizens Council, lambasted the book as a thinly veiled endorsement of interracial marriage. State legislators got into the act, raising a commotion that in the end resulted in the resignation of the director of the Alabama State Library. The story is indicative of the fact that it's frequently the people on the front lines of a censorship battle, for instance, a teacher or a librarian, who find themselves most immediately at risk of suffering adverse, serious consequences. In an interview published in 1988 in Mark West's book, Trust Your Children, Judith F. Krug, director of ALA's Office for Intellectual Freedom, noted that censorship challenges typically increase in periods of economic distress, that the sharp uptick in book challenges, usually attributed to the Reagan years of the 1980s, actually started in the last years of the Carter administration, a period of runaway inflation. Krug added, in some ways, contemporary children's literature is based on a new value system, one in which the nuclear family is no longer the focal point. Less than half of today's families, this is still her speaking, conform to the nuclear family model. Not everyone has come to terms with these social changes. Book censors are among those who have not. She noted as well, quote, "The same factors that led to an increase in censorship also led to the election of Reagan. That once in office, the Reagan administration had not so much made attacks on writers like Judy Blume and Norma Klein a priority as created an atmosphere that was conducive to censors, be they in or out of government. In the same spirit, it is also too easy to pin all censorious impulses on the religious and or political right. Long before Madeline L'Engle's A Wrinkle in Time was attacked in the 1980s by Christian fundamentalists for not being Christian enough, a raft of prospective publishers had rejected L'Engle's manuscript, in part, we may suppose, in the wake of the recent court rulings banning school prayer for being too Christian. One of the many American schools where the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn has been viewed as problematic is, drum roll, the Mark Twain Intermediate School of Fairfax County, Virginia, where a progressive-minded teacher produced his own edition of the book in order to replace the offensive N-word, the different word that he thought preferable, slave. As well-meaning as this alteration of Mark Twain's text may have been, betrays a high degree of discomfort with the challenge of confronting and teaching the past that ought, it seems to me, be a basic component of every young person's education. Similar questions about our relationship to the past and our obligation to teach it are raised by the recent controversy surrounding the two picture books, A Fine Dessert and a Beautiful Cake, birthday cake, for George Washington. I hope this morning will be long enough for us to talk about those books too. Thank you.
Our panelists would please take the stage. Our first panel discussion, entitled Developing Challenged Children's Books, Authors and Their Editors, will also be moderated by Leonard. And now I'll turn this over to Leonard and he will introduce the panelists to you.
All right. Thank you again. Okay, so a brief introduction so that we can get to our discussion. First, next to me, Susan Kuklin, who I've known for many years, has been writing many books on what might be called cutting-edge subjects. Susan writes that her passionate belief in one's freedom of expression has led her to photograph young adult, to write and photograph books for young adults and for younger people as well. Her most recent book to be discussed here today is Beyond Magenta, Transgender Teens Speak Out, which won a number of prizes and has been subject to a number of challenges. She started as a photographer, and I was very interested to know that one of her heroes is Studs Terkel, the great Whitman-esque interviewer of American society. And she brings that skill as an interviewer to bear, and her talent as a photographer is a way of complementing the voices of young people living through challenging times. Okay. Next to her is Hilary Van Dusen, executive editor of Candlewick Press, who specializes in nonfiction, both for middle grade and young adult readers. And Hilary has worked with Susan Kuklin, and she has also worked with Robie Harris, one of our other speakers, among many other authors. What's so good about that is we have authors and their editors present together to talk about books that have caused a stir in America today. Okay. Next is Robie Harris, who has been here at Bank Street for so long that I'm sure you all know a lot about her. Robie, I was interested to find out, didn't really set out to be a writer at first, but she was a teacher and educator. She was working around children a great deal, and her books evolved out of those experiences. Her book is Perfectly Normal, a pioneering book about human sexuality for young people. Is more than 20 years old now. It marked its 20th anniversary, 2014. It's one of the most widely challenged books in America and beyond, actually. There's a notorious case of the book being, was it flogged? in Singapore. Yeah, I thought there was something about a whip also. Anyway, yeah, but so, you know, I mean, it's interesting how books can have such a wide reach and evoke such intense reactions, both here and elsewhere. Okay. Justin Richardson is the co-author of And Tango Makes Three. And Justin is a writer and a psychiatrist and has done a lot of, I think, pioneering work at schools with teachers and administrators and also students and parents in talking about sexual difference and just the whole issue of coming of age sexually and how we live with ourselves, really. He's, in addition to being the author of children's books, is also the co-author of a book with a wonderful title, Everything You Never Wanted Your Kids to Know About Sex, but Were Afraid They'd Ask. That sort of says it all, doesn't it? Okay. Next to Justin is David Gale, editor I've known for many years. And David is vice president and editorial director at Simon & Schuster Books for Young Readers. He is the publisher of And Tango Makes Three, the person who edited it. He's also the publisher of many of Sonia Soanes' books, which have been subject to challenges. Books by Chris Lynch and books by Alex Sanchez. So David, it turns out, has really been making a heroic effort over a lot of years to bring important books to young people that not everybody would think would be easy to publish. Okay, and finally, all these papers, Peter Parnell, the other author of And Tango Makes Three. And Peter is a playwright, and he's worked on and off Broadway and for television, on The West Wing, for example, and has worked with Alan Alda and with Harry Connick Jr. and all sorts of other really major talents in the world of theater and dramatic performance. I find it sort of inspiring that someone with that background would also be writing books for young children, and very eager to hear what he and everybody else has to say. So let's begin. I'm hoping this will be a conversation among our panelists and also with you guys. What actually happens when a book gets challenged? Do you want to start, Susan? And you can, whoever wants to answer first.
Yeah. Robie.
What happens? John Burton, feel free to jump in. So that means that anybody can walk into a library or maybe a bookstore or public library or school library and says, for the following reasons, and we can name all the reasons that may not have to do with reality. This book is not in the best interest of children, and we want it out of the library. So then the librarian, and Allie Bruce is here, and I think there are other librarians, They really have to defend their professional judgment as they go before library boards, their communities, and it's very, I think very, very difficult for them, and it's work beyond work, and defend their professional judgment. And then there is often a vote taken. Not every challenge means the book is taken out of that library, but it may be. And then who really suffers from that? Those children who may come to the library to read any of these books, and all of the rest of the authors in this audience who are either looking for something specific that they need to read about to help them go through their lives and normal, healthy lives, or sometimes when they're very disturbing things, or they come across a book by happenstance and they read it and they say, oh, that's me. And so that's just a quick summary of it. I hope that's clear.
Yeah, please, yeah.
So another thing that happens is when a book is challenged, often the librarian will register that challenge with ALA, the Office of Intellectual Freedom, or with NCAC, National Council Against Censorship. Sorry, anyway, you get it. So that there are organizations behind the librarian trying to back them up and support them in their efforts to keep that book on the shelf, and also in their efforts just standing up to these boards and the parents and everyone else who's telling them they're not doing their job. So
and also Pan American Center and also publishers move forward to help the librarians.
We, Peter and I, last night started to try to scratch our heads and think about when was the first time our book was challenged and why was it challenged and what happened. And we went through our old emails and found out that the book was published in June of '05, and the first challenge was in March of '06, and it was in Missouri. And what happened was a parent went into the library there, and their child had picked up the book and started to read the book, and they complained to the librarian, and the librarian thought to herself, oh yeah, I can see why, this is a problem, and decided to take the book out of the fiction section, which is where all the kids browse, and squeeze it into the non-fiction section where none of the kids browse, and made a note of that in her log. And of course, in these small towns, there are small town newspaper people, and there was one fellow whose beat it was to read the log of the library. And in his very small newspaper, he reported this, and he got a quote from the librarian saying, well, I put it there because it's less likely to blindside families, and kids don't tend to browse there. And he published that in this little newspaper, and the Associated Press picked it up, and this story went around the world, and that's what happened. So if you think about the reporter on the ground, that's who often brings this story to the public, and it went around the world. And of course, we found out about it because we had a Google alert, and that's the other thing that happens. I don't know if you do that, but then you, as the author, think, should I do something about this? What should I say? Should I get involved? Should I not? Should I leave it to the locals to figure it out? And but we then read, and here's the other thing, we then read an article in the American Librarian, which was the organ of ALA. Now, all of these organizations play a very important role in protecting the books, but they also have to be brought up to speed on new books. And the very first time that the American Library Association dealt with this book was when they found out about this challenge, and they went to the support of the librarian and wrote a story that said a big flap over nothing, and they ended the story. Now, bear in mind, this is a long time ago, right? This is 2005. They ended the story this way. The bottom line, reads, said the librarian, is that Tango will remain an accessible book. So the book can say to kids in non-nuclear families that the kids, are okay regardless of how we feel about their parents' life choices. End of article, so that's all okay. So we, of course, read that, and were outraged and wrote to Judy Krug, who's the head of the Office of Intellectual Freedom, and said, Judy, what about this? And we wrote to the president of the American Library Association and to the editor of this. And, you know, that got people interested and engaged. And, you know, I think this was probably the first librarian, maybe, to deal with a complaint about her book. But subsequent librarians had had the opportunity to read our letter to the editor about this challenge and to talk amongst themselves and to develop an opinion. And soon you see that there's a whole world of folks who are aware of the challenge, aware of how to address it when it happens, and then it's a whole different situation. And for the subsequent challenges, PEN is there, and the ALA is there, and local organizations of gay and lesbian parents are there.
In the ACLU, you can write letters and cite case law as well, so which is important for school boards to know.
Do you all think that social media is kind of a net plus in terms of, as a resource for jumping over the heads of some of the objectors to books these days?
Well, I think it's plus and minus.
Sure.
I think it's a plus and minus because years ago when I was writing books that would be very similar to Beyond Magenta, can you all hear? I wasn't challenged. I mean, no one did anything because they didn't have this huge social media and didn't have cable and all that stuff. But there were whole towns and parts of states that the reps don't even bother bringing her books because they're not going to buy my books. So I didn't know anything about that, but this is, as far as I know, the first time I've been challenged. So I think a lot of it has to do with media. Do you agree with that?
I agree. Well, anyway, I think it's changed dramatically. And the first time it happened for us, and I'll do this very quickly, there's a bunch of us up here. The first time it happened for us, and I say for us, which includes Michael Emberley, illustrator of some of my books, and some books that Michael has illustrated have been challenged and banned, is that the very first time that it happened that social media took place, or the internet, even before the rise of social media, was in Portland and Auburn, Maine, where a woman, and this is when I go back to the librarians, decided it was her role to take It's Perfectly Normal and another book of ours, It's So Amazing, out of the library. So she took them, she sent a check to the library. Librarians were phenomenal, and for most parts they are. I've had librarians say to me, I would not have your books in my own home, but it's my job as a librarian, a public school librarian, a public librarian, to have a range of well-reviewed materials. And so I have them in my collection. I wish I'd kept note. I think it's 10 or 11 or 12 times that's been sent to me. So anyway, she took them out, just to run through this very quickly. She took them out. She then sent a check to the library and said, you know, these books are not appropriate, they're pornographic, children will become pregnant and at very young ages, they will become infected and die. I mean, it's every single thing. But the point is that the librarians who were on the front lines sent the check back, said, you know, we're not booksellers. You need to return the books. It became a case before the courts, and the cities of Portland spent so much money that they ended up just absolving her as a misdemeanor. And they did nothing, and that's where I disagreed with them, because I felt that she should have given, because it was costing so much money, she should have been told to give back in community service, not at the library. All the hours of government time that we spent there, and just a quick aside, which will be talked about on this panel, we just got another challenge yesterday, okay? So it's alive and kicking.
We saw the power of social media in Singapore, and that really flipped that situation. When our books were, I think your book was pulped, our book was threatened to be, was slated to be pulped, and when people found out about that, the folks in Singapore who were interested in the issue created a meme which used the little insignia from Penguin books, and they created 2 penguins and a little penguin baby. And they wrote, "Free my library," and that was on the Facebook page of many, many people. Then hundreds of people signed an online petition, and then there was a woman who wrote a very beautiful piece to the Minister of Education with a photograph of herself and her daughter and her non-traditional family, and said, "Dear Minister, I know you don't like families like ours, but we exist." And that got circulated on Twitter, and the result was that families were called to read in outside of the National Library in Singapore. And hundreds of families brought their kids in their pajamas with our books and read them, and that was videotaped, and that went online, got a lot of views, and the Minister of Education reversed his position, and the books were restored. Except for the ones that are already.
So, David, would you talk a little bit about how Tango Makes 3 came to your attention, and maybe how you thought about presenting it to the world?
Yeah, I got the manuscript in, and the manuscript was just gorgeous. The thing about Tango, as important as it is for gay and lesbian kids and parents, gay and lesbian parents who have kids and adoptive families, first and foremost, it's a great picture book. And that's how I approached it. At Simon & Schuster, when we went to acquire something, we do involve the whole company, basically. Our editorial meetings, no, it's works to advantage, to our advantage. It's an editorial decision what we buy, but at the meeting are sales, marketing, publicity, sub-rights, and we get everybody on board from the beginning, and if there's potential issues or competitive books that are in the works that we might not know about, this is where we hear about it, so we know how to position our books. This book, I wasn't expecting controversy, and in fact, the first illustrator that I approached, I sent him the manuscript, he said he wouldn't do it because he didn't feel comfortable illustrating this book. He didn't want to have that attention on him. So, you know, a bell struck, and I only was looking for a gay or lesbian illustrator to do that. And Henry Cole was at the top of the list, and he loved it, and he did a remarkable job with it. The challenges started pretty quickly. By that point, before we published, we were expecting them. So that's why at the back of the book we have, we had sent this out for advanced blurbs. We have quotes from Maurice Sendak, Harvey Fierstein, Wendy Wasserstein, and John Lithgow on the jacket. And that's sort of like a preemptive strike to give it some authority.
Yeah. Hilary, would you want to answer the same question? I'm talking about Beyond Magenta.
Sure, yeah. So Beyond Magenta was submitted to me through Susan's agent, and I received it and immediately looked at it, and I put it right here, and this is where I work. And it sat there for a couple of weeks, because when I read that proposal for the book, it was a groundbreaking proposal, like a book I had never seen or worked on or published before. And I had to really think about it. And so eventually, after a couple of weeks, I took it to, we have a very different process at Candlewick for acquiring books. I basically just have a conversation with our editorial director about the books that I want to acquire, and she says yes or no, and I sign them up. So I took it to my editorial director, and I also showed it to another editor who was at that time working on a lot of LGBT books. So she read it, and we had a conversation, the three of us, and it was just unanimous. We have to publish this book. This is such an important book. So that's how the book came to be. And Susan, had thought out the whole format and how it was going to, come together at that point. So I had a really good idea of what I would be getting from Susan.
Yeah. I also wanted to ask you and David, as the publishers here, how do you perceive the market for books like these? Is it more librarians who are sort of socially progressive, or are the big chain stores worried about books like this, or not, or what?
Well, it definitely a library sale, for sure, and I hope not just progressive librarians, but all librarians. There has been some chain store pickup, and we haven't had any pushback from, the Barnes and Nobles of the world, which is good so far. But, this week we were completely surprised by the banned book list and seeing it number 4, and we haven't even heard of any of the challenges yet. So we don't really know where these challenges are coming from or what they are. So I'm a little bit baffled at the moment about where we stand.
Oh, yeah, please.
You know what's weird is when I started to write this book, I did not write it with the idea that this is a banned subject or even a cutting-edge subject. It was kids were getting hurt, kids were getting bullied, some were even murdered, and no one had a voice. And I thought, and this is a really interesting topic. So I wanted to know more about it, and that's all it was. I never thought that this was a challenge book or a banned book. It was just an interesting subject. And so it's when you come from the inside out, it's a very odd feeling, I'll tell you. Do you all feel that way too?
I just want to say,
We talked about this.
add one thing about it is that the word controversial is, of the people I know, which is a small group of people, authors I know, and I've talked to them about this for years and even quite recently, no one I know, and maybe people do this, has set out to write a controversial book. We've set out to write a book, and I used this term before, and I'm curious to know what all of you think, that maybe is a way to have a conversation with kids about things that have, and situations, and whether it's fiction or nonfiction, and we're all about, you're fiction, but you're nonfiction. That's right. Things that books that have meaning for children. And what happens is that once they're labeled by, and I do say the other side, as controversial, right? The controversy creates the label controversial. And then they're labeled, and suddenly it's got, like that word across the front, controversial. And even yesterday, I printed out the challenge. It's not a challenge yet, but explicit sex ed book causes controversy. Yeah. So I think we have to be very careful about the words and label.
Well, that's true. That's true. But Tango. Getting back to the original question, Tango's worked in libraries and in bookstores. Barnes & Noble and Amazon have been great supporters of this. But the thing about Tango and controversy is that as awful as it is for books to be challenged and for some kids to be denied access to it, the publicity generated from a challenge spikes the sales like you cannot believe. This book, this is their 10th year now, and it doesn't follow any of our sales patterns. Every time there's been a challenge, the sales have spiked. 10 years, we've never put it to paperback, except in this anniversary year, we did a book and tape package, a book and CD package, where with the paperback edition, and Neil Patrick Harris reads the book. But there's not a standalone paperback edition because the hardcover sales are just remarkable, and it's because of all the controversy.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, going back to the thing I said about Judy Blume earlier, so these books are reaching their audience without necessarily having to go into paperback. Is that what we're saying?
My book's in it.
It is.
My book's in paperback, and the reason, just to go way back in history, after the I think first printing, Michael Umberly and I went to the Powers of Being Candlewick and said, this book is, 1895 now. We said, we would like to see it in the hands of more kids, families, healthcare professionals, yes, clergy, because if what we're looking at is true, that we're selling out these printings very quickly, we care more about them being in the hands of Candlewick. You're absolutely right. And went into paperback much earlier than you would have thought. And since they're quality paperbacks, then we can get more of the kids.
But we also, with Susan's book, is, you know, it's pretty hefty to carry around in hardcover, and we were thinking that kids probably wouldn't want to carry it around because of its size and its weight and its cost. And so the paperback is just a more manageable book for kids to have. And the size is smaller, a little bit smaller in paperback.
To go into backpacks.
Oh, yeah,
Right.
that's what I was
Yeah, that was the intention.
Okay, yeah. So Peter, I'd like to ask you, how would you compare the connection you feel to your theatrical audience with the connection you feel to the readers of Tango?
Oh, sure. Well, yeah, I mean, in the theater or TV, controversy definitely means sales. You know, you sort of, in a funny way, that is what you, I mean, you want people to talk about what it is ideally what you're writing, what you're working on. But yes, we didn't go into working on this book for that reason. I grew up loving and reading picture books, as we all did, and I first got involved with the picture book world in a way through the theater, because Maurice Sendak was starting to work on a theater version of Really Rosie, and I was pretty young, and I was introduced to him as a young playwright who could help him organize the script for production that Pat Birch was going to be directing off Broadway, and Maurice and I became friends. And because I had grown up loving picture books and knowing his work, and because he loved the theater, I was able over the years to always see him. And eventually I worked on a screenplay of Really Rosie. Maurice and John Carls worked at TriStar for a while. TriStar Pictures, they had a company that was developing and producing some movies, ultimately, Where the Wild Things Are and such. And Really Rosie was not made as a movie, but I worked on the screenplay for quite a while. And Sendak was great. And I sort of this move from understanding structure and characters and language that could work in TV. In between this time, Little Bear was bought to be made into an animated series, and I worked on the first season of Little Bear again with Maurice and with Elsa Minerick, Holman Minerick, on that. So for me, there was a kind of move that had an understanding of story, character, dialogue, moving from children's literature into more popular entertainment. And so when Justin and I first started to work on Tango, and it was, reading about it, an article about homosexuality in the animal kingdom in the Central Park Zoo in the New York Times, and it was Justin who's much smarter than I am, especially early in the morning. We read this article, and he came up with this idea, and he said, what? Sorry. The Love That Dare Not Squeak Its Name was the title of the article. So when we came up with this idea to work on this book, it felt like a natural journey for me to do.
Let's hear from everybody else. Does someone have a question here for anybody on the panel here? Yes, Rita.
I have a comment. In defense of the American Library Association.
We love the American Library Association, by the way.
But before this perhaps unfortunate article appeared in American Libraries, I would like to point out that the American Library Association Notable Children's Book Committee, the Association for Library Service to Children, had and Tango Makes 3 on the list of notable children's books for that year. So we were supporting you before this question.
Thank you for pointing that out, and thank you for supporting us.
I have a question. Have any of you been disinvited from a speaking engagement because of the controversy around the books, and how has that been handled? Like, you've been invited to speak at a school or a library or a convention or something of that nature, and then been disinvited. This is happening, I'm aware of, more and more with a lot of authors like Ellen Hopkins, etc. And I'm just wondering, where in your experience that has perhaps happened.
I've had it many times, and it's a bit of a dilemma, because What I say is that, you know, if I'm going to talk about picture books, right, that, and I'm not talking about our younger picture books, for example, a book called Who Has What, which names all the parts of the body, right? I'm not talking about this, I'm talking about fiction, not non-fiction, picture books. And I'm told things, or just about writing, I'm saying, I get this call or email and says, you know, just please don't mention those books on sex, right? And I respond that you know, wait a minute, I said I'm never going to start lying to kids. And I can't do this. If a question comes up, I might comment on one of these books. No child's going to be hurt or damaged by it. And when I'm told that I absolutely can't do this, and I don't go, I won't go. And I feel like in some ways I should go, but to stand up there in front of class, which have many people even who are on the panels here, it just feels like I'm not emotionally able to do it, and I'm not going to start lying to kids. So on the other hand, some people do go and break the rule, and other people go and they go anyway and don't mention their books. I hear about it happening a lot. The other point that I just wanted to throw out, which other people probably talk, is that then you worry about all of these kinds of things as you're writing your next book and your next book and your next book. Not do you self-censor, but you unconsciously self-censor, right? Or do librarians and booksellers suddenly, I mean, they're thinking about children and the good things for children, but just say, I'm not going to buy that book or have it in my collection. So the chilling effect, I think, is out there in these, we won't go into that, but these political times that we're living in certainly stir that up.
One of my authors is Tim Federle, and his first book, Better Nate Than Ever, the kid doesn't know if he's gay, he probably is, but there's no gay content in the book. Tim, growing up in Pittsburgh, was bullied as a gay kid, and when the book was about to be published, his first speaking engagement, school visit, was to hit the school that he went to, his middle school. And 2 weeks before the appearance, they canceled him because they finally read the book. And then, after the book was so successful, they honored Tim in their school's Hall of Fame, and Tim refused to go to the award ceremony, but he sent a gay kid at the school to accept it for him.
To Hilary and David, to what extent do editors, maybe not you, but others in general, hesitate when you see a manuscript that might trigger a challenge? Is there and you push back on authors, or do you think other publishers do or hesitate to publish such books?
I've actually heard from some agents who've submitted that kind of material that other editors have not accepted because of the content, but that's not really a concern for me. The thing for me is I don't want anything sensationalized for the sake of sensationalizing. I mean, it's just, I want an honest, I work on mostly nonfiction anyway, but you know, an honest portrayal that's going to help kids, not just make something spectacular in some way, you know.
Yeah, the same. I've heard from agents that other editors had issues with books. It's never come up at Simon & Schuster. Again, I don't want to publish a problem novel where the issue is the point of the book. But if it's a well-rounded book, then I never get any pullback in trying to write that kind of book.
So I confess I sometimes feel uneasy when I hear people talking about, oh, that book got censored, that's so exciting, like celebrate Banned Books Week, because as a librarian who's been on the receiving end, I can tell you that it is super stressful, it is not fun, and I wish it had not happened. So my question, this might be mostly for Hilary or David, is what supports do you offer for librarians preferably in 140 characters or less. Tweet out to say, here's what you can do if you are one of these librarians who has to work late because a constituent has challenged a book.
Well, there's so many layers to that answer, I have to say. First of all, some of the librarians that are challenged have to remain anonymous, and so they can't ask for the help of the publisher. So we have to stand back. We might know about a challenge, but we have to stand back until the librarian is asking for support. And at that point, we support, and we've done this for Robie a number of times, by writing letters, sending reviews, sending copies if the book has been removed from the library. Like the library in Maine, we flooded that library with copies of her book. Yeah, exactly. And anything that ALA recommends or any of the other organizations, if they have suggestions for things that we can do, we put together a package, we send it to the librarian and support them anyway. And as far as getting the author involved, that is also a tricky thing. We don't want to put the authors on the front line. But Robie has spoken up at challenges before, and we have to kind of weigh the benefits of doing that and protecting her as well. So that's
just one quick, and then to David. I am happy to talk to librarians whenever, if they wish that. And Joan, am I correct, Joan Burton, that NCAC, as a lawyer, you can have a conversation with a librarian that's privileged?
Oh, absolutely. And we, like ALA, we maintain confidentiality anytime anybody asks for it, and we work in collaboration with ALA to support libraries. And libraries are public institutions. They're not allowed to take books off the shelves because people don't like the ideas in them. That is in the Constitution. And that's our job, is to, give them that kind of information and help them, resist the pressure.
Maybe one or two more. One more question.
Can I just say one thing about the librarians, because it is really hard in terms of self-censorship, dealing with, I know that if I write something, it's the librarians who are going to have their jobs on the line, or are going to have all that extra work. And it is very painful to me. And very quickly, I want to say that I was once working on a chapter when CCBC was having a conversation about librarians who were just in pain because they had to keep certain books under the desk, and because the F-bomb has become such a big thing, and what should they do? And it was going on. And meanwhile, I was counting the shit, how many shits to be accurate the person was saying, and I was there, and I was literally crying because I thought, oh my God, these poor librarians are going to have to face that. And I had to decide, do I want to help out the librarians or the person in the book? So just like that.
Yes.
I know that you said that it creates a lot of publicity when books are challenged, but do you find that submissions have increased or decreased when authors see that a book is having a tough time in the marketplace?
I don't think authors see that. We only accept submissions from agents. And agents are aware of what we publish and the things that are pushing, seem to be pushing the limits. So they know what kinds of things we'll publish. I don't know that I've seen an increase in submissions, but I certainly, if I'm offered something that is potentially controversial, of course the agent points out this is in line with X and X, which you already published.
Is there one more question? Yes.
I guess this is mostly for Hilary and David. There are some books in Europe that seem to go, they're very successful in Europe, and they kind of go a little bit beyond, they're maybe a little more controversial. And I've read that they can't be published in the U.S. Have you had any experience with those kinds of books?
I'm sorry, why couldn't they be published here? I'm
Because
not sure
they're
what.
too controversial is what I've read. There's particularly some Norwegian books that are very successful there, but they cannot be published in the United States?
I'm not offered a lot of books from other countries like that, so I'm not aware of that.
I've had just a little bit of experience there, and first of all, it's really difficult to get a translation to actually figure out what the text is saying. But I have found the level of violence is sometimes higher, and there's just a different, everyone knows, there's a different attitude towards sexuality in Europe, or in some European countries. So, you know, it's really just, I haven't had to say no because of that reason. There are a lot of other reasons to say no, but I think there is a difference, for sure, in some of the fiction that is published in Europe versus here.
Okay, well, thank you all.